Right, good evening, everybody. Sorry, the clocks in here are just very slightly slow, so I'm just going by the time on my laptop, which I think is probably accurate. Welcome to this meeting of Planning Committee this evening on the 10th of September. To say welcome to members, welcome to officers, welcome to members of the public, and to anybody watching the YouTube broadcast of this meeting. Start on with the agenda items. The first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. We have apologies from three councillors this evening. Councillor Beavis, who hasn't appointed a substitute, Councillor Monday, who also hasn't appointed a substitute, and Councillor Ritchie, who has appointed Councillor Prime as his substitute. Item 2 on the agenda, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest, or non-pecuniary interest relating items on the agenda? Councillor Abbott.
Item 5B, because CPRE has submitted a representation. I'm an ordinary member of CPRE, but I've had no contact with them about this application. MPI, stay and vote.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Anybody else? Okay, I would declare an interest myself. I'm actually I declare an interest on the first application, 23/01413 full. A number of the speakers are known to me. In fact, two of the speakers are known to me, and many of the people who've written in to the council on this application also known to me. I'm at the ward member for Belsham St Paul. I haven't discussed the merits of this at all with anybody, and I will remain and vote. Mrs Wisby.
Thank you, Chairman. You've said that some of the speakers are known to you.
Yeah.
Could you explain in which capacity they are known to you, because that is relevant to your declaration, please?
Yes, so Councillor McKee is known to me as Chairman of Parish Council. I attend Parish Council meetings. Councillor Knott I have spoken to on the phone in relation to a completely different application. I also attend that Parish Council meeting, but I haven't actually had the privilege of meeting her yet at that meeting, so I think she's just joined as a councillor.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. So we'll now move on to item 3 on the agenda, which is minutes of the previous meeting. Members, I have before me the minutes of the meeting on the 20th of August. I was not actually at that meeting, but do I have your, could someone move approval of the minutes as a correct record? Councillor Prime, thank you. Does that find a seconder? Councillor Abbott, thank you. And all those in favour of approving those minutes? Thank you, members. Just pass on those to Councillor Holland to sign, as he was in the chair on that date.
Councillor Parker, you may sign as
Oh,
the
sorry.
Chairman.
I may sign them, apparently. So now move on to the item 4 on the agenda, public question time. We don't have any speakers to speak on general matters, so we move on to planning applications, which is item 5 on the agenda. The first application this evening is application number 23/01413 full, which is land north of Cutbush Farm, Bakers Road, Belsham St Paul. This is to be found on pages 5 to 116 on your agenda. We do have speakers on this application, and the first speaker I'd like to call forward is Councillor Deborah Knott, who represents Thistle Oldham, Tilbury Juxtacare and Ovington Parish Council. 3 minutes, thank you. Councillor Knott.
Good evening, councillors. I'm representing Little Oldham, Tilbury Juxtacare and Ovington Parish Council. Whilst the application site lies within Belsham St Paul, it is on the edge of the parish of Ovington, and the nearest houses to the site within Ovington lie 400 metres away. Despite this being so close to Ovington, our parish council has never been formally consulted by the applicant or their agent. This seems highly irregular and unjustifiable to the residents of our village, when they are the ones most affected by the proposal. Direct consultation with individual households in Ovington has also been sporadic, a situation that has not been rectified even though we have raised this issue. Ovington and Tilbury Clare will bear the brunt of the chaos caused by the construction of the solar farm, as the proposed route runs through both of these villages. We have repeatedly requested evidence of traffic surveys on these smaller roads, as the impact of construction traffic through our villages has been completely overlooked. The Planning Officer's report states that the local highway authority raises no highway safety concerns in relation to the use of these local roads, but we suggest this is simply because the application does not draw attention to their use. The route from Great Yeldon follows Tilbury Road into Tilbury Juxta Clare, probably the most notorious section of local road in the area, and currently subject to an application to the local highways panel for weight and width restrictions. Much of this section is without pavements. This is considered a dangerous stretch of road by many, and although two-way, the overgrown vegetation and overhanging branches make it impossible for 2 cars, let alone HGVs, to pass in places. The route then enters Ovington on Clare Road. This is already a very busy and fast road, used as a cut-through by drivers between Great Yeldon and Clare. Ovington does not have the benefit of many footpaths, and with no pavements in the village, there are often walkers, cyclists and horses on this road. The applicant states that they have demonstrated that the existing road network has sufficient capacity to overcome a temporary increase in traffic movements during the construction period. But where is the evidence? There have been no traffic surveys undertaken. Another response that the route diverts around settlement areas simply is not true. Their conclusion that the proposed development will not cause any harm to the safety of the users of the public highway network is questionable. Our parish council of Little Yeldon, Tilbury Juxta Clare and Ovington represents the residents of these parishes. These residents deserve the respect of the applicants to the extent that we should have been fully consulted from the start. To allow this application to be granted permission without such consultation is unfair. It is not unreasonable to expect traffic surveys to be undertaken on the local road network to properly consider the implication of the additional traffic to the proposed route. Whilst the construction phase may not be permanent, the implications to the local community are serious and potentially extremely dangerous, even fatal. Finally, as a neighbouring parish council, we would like to express our full support to Belsham St Paul and Belsham Otten Parish Council in their wider objections to the solar farm application. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Knott. The next person to make a statement this evening is Councillor David McKee, who's the Chairman of Belsham St Paul and Belsham Otten Parish Council. Good evening.
As members will now know, the Parish Council have raised a formal complaint against the LPA with reference to a number of substantive issues pertaining to this planning application, which the PC assert in the strongest terms will make any decision taken tonight unsafe. This complaint is currently ongoing, having reached stage 3 of the Council's complaints procedure, meaning that it's under consideration by the CEO even as we speak. The PC were therefore shocked to find that despite several serious and yet unresolved allegations having been made against both the applicant and the LPA itself, it has nevertheless seen fit to progress this hearing to hearing this application this evening. Members will have received a copy of the PC's call for stage 3, which also acts as a brief for the issues raised by the PC for your information and consideration. The PC have also made a number of submissions addressing the merits of the subject application. I want to make it clear that I'm not here to discuss these this evening, except to say that, as Chairman, we will accept the committee's decision in this regard, provided that this is carried out in an even-handed manner that is free of bias and obstruction towards the PC and those whose interests they represent. Sadly, this is demonstrably not the case here. Despite numerous entreaties for the LPA to publish the PC's submission to, a document that delves into a questionable modus operandi practiced by the applicant over several planning applications, the LPA at first refused to publish this altogether on the grounds that it was misleading and potentially defamatory. When that didn't work, the LPA belatedly switched some 6 months after receipt to arguing that submission 2 was potentially inflammatory and that it would only publish it in redacted form. Whilst the PC vehemently reject any suggestion that submission 2 is in any way inflammatory, they nevertheless offered to consider amending the text in submission 2 so as to meet the LPA's concerns. The PC never received a reply to this offer. The PC have recorded what they consider to be examples of conflicts of interest, both the applicant and the LPA, and a failure on the part of the applicant to adhere to planning policies when making its application site selection. Despite its stage 1 and 2 complaint responses, the LPA has failed to provide any meaningful reply and has simply ignored the vast majority of the PC's concerns. I therefore ask you tonight to call for a deferment so that the substantive issues we have raised can be carefully considered in a calm and measured manner. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councillor McGee. The next person wishing to make a statement on this application is Mr. Jacques Carboni, who is representing the agent.
Okay. Oh, am I starting? Yep. Good afternoon, everyone. I am speaking as the agent in favour of the proposal today on behalf of BSR, who are the applicant. BSR are a British company whose mission is to create abundant and accessible renewable energy, which has a positive impact on the people and the planet. ADOS Planning and BSR have worked in partnership on securing a number of successful planning consents for renewable energy projects, such as this. Our development will support an existing rural enterprise, deliver community benefits, and deliver significant biodiversity net gains of 67.11% for habitat units and a 57.95% increase in hedgerow units through the planting of native hedgerows and trees, whilst also enhancing and installing additional habitats. The proposed 37.5 megawatt AC solar PV array will have the potential to offset the average annual UK electricity consumption in excess of 12,000 houses per annum. The proposal has a lifespan of 40 years, and the land can quickly be reverted to its current arable use at the end of the useful life of the proposal, owing to the unintrusive nature of the development. During this time, the quality of the soil will be protected, and the process of installation and decommission will be guided through a detailed soil management plan, which will be secured via condition. We have worked closely with the case officer and the Council's technical consultees since May 2023 to carefully address any concerns and to accommodate necessary changes that have been requested during this process. The case officer's report clearly sets out the key issues, and we fully endorse the case officer's positive recommendation. Several changes have been made to the layout on the advice of the case officer, the Council's technical consultees, and the local community. This includes, but is not limited to, limiting it to one temporary construction compound and placing this within the main site to avoid unnecessary removal of existing hedgerow. It also includes a generous setback between the solar panels and Bakers Road and the 2 Grade 2 listed properties at Cutbush Farm, the inclusion of additional planting along the boundaries of the site where hedgerows and trees are gappy, such as at Long Lane and Bakers Road, and the planting of hedgerows within the site to form corridors throughout the site. Any potential impact on highways has been thoroughly assessed by the Council's professional officers, who are satisfied that the development is acceptable and will not result in unacceptable impact to Bakers Road or to the wider highway network. Similarly, the following issues of the updated plan and the updated information, the Historic Buildings officers confirmed that the scheme would result in a very low level of less than substantial harm to the significance of the Grade 2 listed farmhouse and barn at Cutbush Farm. The proposal would also not result in harm to the significance of the group of 4 listed buildings at Claredown Farmstead. The case officer has carefully considered this planning application and ultimately concluded that the proposal satisfied the wider planning balance and complies with the development plan when taken as a whole. Therefore, I would respectfully request that the committee follows the officer's positive recommendation and approve the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carboni. That brings us to the end of speakers on this application, so I will now hand over to Catherine, who's going to give us the officer's report.
Thank you, Chairman. So the application is for solar arrays at land north of Cutbush Farm, Bakers Road, Belchamp, St Paul. This is the location plan. So the site area is around 53 hectares. It sits north of Bakers Road, this road here, This lies between the villages of Ovington in the west and Belchamp St Paul in the east. The site is sort of gently sloping. It's largely plateau, but it's gently sloping. You'll see that on the contour maps which will follow. You'll see also here that this red line pertains to the cable route, which is linking to the Hickford Hill station up here. So just in terms of public rights of way, we've got two main public rights of way which adjoin the site but don't lie within it. So on the western side here we've got Long Lane. That extends obviously up to the north, where it is a local wildlife site, part of it. And there's also a public right of way on the eastern side here, and you can see it sort of diverts off and then joins the cable route and sort of travels underneath it, or and then carries on north. In terms of constraints, you can see the footpaths here marked in red, Bridleway here, and the local wildlife sites designation. The oil pipeline is marked in the brown line. So this sort of sits approximately, say, a third of the way down the site. So the site boundaries are up here. And you can just make out to the north here, this is the AONB project area designation, which is to the north. So the site isn't in it, but it does abut it here. The Grade 2 listed building of Cutbush Farm is located here. I'll just move back for you. You can see that there's an area of land which isn't within the site, a sort of buffer, I suppose, really, around Cutbush Farm itself. You can just make out the pylon route here. I'll see if I can just show you it on a different plan. This one here. So that doesn't actually, it's not within the site, but it sort of does, you can see it in the landscape within the same context as the site. It sort of goes up to the substation up there. So in terms of agricultural land classification, the site is predominantly Grade 3, with a portion of Grade 2 land located here. So 3A land is in the darker green. In terms of topography, you can appreciate that this is essentially plateau of higher land, and the river valley lies to the north, the River Stour. In terms of landscape character areas, again, that's reflected. It's called the Belchamp Plateau, and this land to the north is the Stour Valley. The planning layout plans, it's always difficult when they such large area and such a small screen. So I'll try and take you through it if I can. So you can see, well, these areas of blue would be the solar panels. There's a number of routes through which I think are probably easier to see on the landscape master plan. But essentially in the north here, there's an HV, or high voltage compound, where some of that would be enclosed in, you can just make it out here actually, there's a close-up, enclosed by a fence with various containers, which are listed in the report in detail, located to the south of that, and you can just make out here where the cable route would puncture the hedgerow. So in terms of accesses, the existing access is located here in this corner. That would be the operational and construction access, but a temporary access would also be formed in this location here on Bakers Road, which would be stopped up when construction activity ceased. The internal tracks would be constructed of recycled stone, and there would be 103 CCTV cameras sited at regular intervals around the boundary. Now, each of these areas here, again, I think you can probably better if I take you to this. So you can see that there are sort of compartments within the layout. They are all deer fencing compounds. So outside of the fencing areas is the hedgerows and the buffer areas around the edges of the site and the planting areas. So on this plan, what it's showing you is, so within the compounds themselves, there would be a grazing meadow, species-rich grassland. So I think the report referred to that as wildflower meadow, but I think it's probably more accurate to say that it's mostly grasses really, so it would be a high proportion of grasses with a foraging herb mix component of 10%. And then around the other, outside of these compounds, would be the species-rich grasslands, so that would be much more wildflowers really. You can, in the south here, there would be an additional hedgerow to Bakers Road, along with an area of new planting here. There'd be a new hedgerow all the way along here, in addition to the existing hedgerow on Long Lane, so set behind that within the site. Existing hedgerows in these locations here would be extended. Again, that would be kept, all these hedgerows would be kept. Extended again here, and further landscaping provided to the northern boundary, including trees, in order to help assimilate some views, obviously from the north. And this plan does confirm that this hedgerow along the boundary to the south would be established early on in the construction phase. But we'll come on to that a bit later. In terms of arboricultural impacts, we've already mentioned the loss of a small section of hedgerow in the northeast where the cable route would need to come through. There's also a small section of hedgerow marked, you can see it in red here, which would need to be removed in order to provide this temporary access, but then that would be reinstated under the landscape plan. And then there's a small section up here which is needed to be removed in order to allow that access track to run through the site and loop through. So the solar panels are obviously mounted on frames, and they would be to a height of 2.6 metres. Anti-reflective coating for those would be mandatory under the conditions proposed. Transformer station details, so these are sort of various intervals around the site at the end of the strings of solar panels essentially. Fence detail, standard deer fencing to a height of 1.9 metres. Private switchgear, that's in that area to the south of the high voltage compound that I pointed out previously. Spares container again would be in that area, and the welfare container. Access roads, as I mentioned, would be compacted recycled stone. CCTV camera detail, 3.5 metres. And this is the high voltage compound, which should be enclosed with a 2.4 metre high palisade fence. That's elevations of it. So the overall, the highest of this plant is 13 metres. So this picture shows you Bakers Road. This is Cutbush Farm, the Grade 2 listed building, barns behind, and if you go up here, this is Long Lane, so you can't actually see the site in this photograph. So as you travel eastwards on Bakers Road, you do come to the south-west corner of the site where there's this existing access road. So that would be the used in construction, but also be the operational access. That's the access here, looking towards Cutbush Farm. So there's a field in between, and then there's Cutbush Farm. As I sort of pointed out to you before, there's a sort of buffer area of fields around Cutbush Farm itself. So this is Bakers Road. The site's on your left-hand side here. So you can see there's an existing sort of gappy, a hedgerow, which a little bit gappy, few trees. Again, pictures of the site itself with Bakers Road here. This is where the temporary access would essentially be. So you can just, these are really standing at the, more or less the same place. So this lay-by is also this lay-by, if you see what I mean. And this is the hedgerow, which would be, some of that would need to go in order to provide the visibility display and the access itself. Temporary access, and then this hedgerow would be reinstated. Now obviously, as I described to you before, there's a hedgerow behind this, a new hedgerow which would be provided as well, so that would provide additional screening over time. So the temporary access is sort of down here. This is pretty much the boundary of the complete boundary of the site. And again, this is as you go much further up Bakers Road and look back, you can see the pylons here. You can see the existing hedgerow along that public right-of-way, which would be the boundary of the site. This is Long Lane, so as you can see, it's a very attractive lane. It has some historic value as well, cultural value, and it is fairly well enclosed, although when you walk along it in the wintertime, you would potentially see the site, so that's why they've proposed another hedgerow beyond that within the site that would double up effectively. So this is the site itself. So I'm standing here at the top of Long Lane, really, looking at the site in front of me. That's the boundary to the north there. And this is the boundary to Long Lane, so the hedgerow would go in the site here. This is the existing vegetation and sort of buffer area really around Cutbush Farm. Again, Cutbush Farm is sort of over here somewhere. And this is just showing you out to the valley, sort of what you can see at the very sort of northernmost extent of the site, so you can appreciate the topography and the sloping nature of it and the fact that this really is one of the highest points. So there are a number of issues in relation to this site which are very detailed and complex. So they are all set out in the report. Key considerations obviously are in terms of land use, best and most versatile land. This site, according to the agricultural soil sampling, which has been submitted. It's approximately 56% best and most versatile land. That energy generation benefits, landscape and visual effects, arboricultural impacts, access, etc., heritage, neighbour amenity, that's all covered in the report. Again, other interests such as ecology. I think you've all got a copy of LPP 73, so it's probably less important that this is here in the presentation. But there are a number of things I'll probably just point out to you, really. So the policy starts off with a balance that needs to be satisfied. So that is the balance of the carbon energy generating potential having to outweigh the harm or the loss of these considerations, and that does include the best and most versatile agricultural land. So you need to decide what harm was caused to some of those aspects or whether they were lost at all. Then there are various other criteria specified. It doesn't say in the policy that all criteria need to be satisfied in order for this policy to be passed, if you see what I mean, for it to be complied with. So it's for you to decide how you read this policy. It's for the decision maker. Again, we've got some environmental concerns which need to be satisfied, some amenity concerns. We've got so the development must be capable of an efficient connection. That's been satisfied, I think. Nobody would disagree with that. And we need to take into account the energy generating potential of the scheme. Again, similar to that balance at the top, really. Then, where appropriate, you would need to decide whether this application needs a sequential assessment, which one has been submitted. It does cover brownfield sites and land of lower quality. You would need to decide whether compelling justification has been provided for proposals on high quality agricultural land. So again, obviously there's the requirements of this policy. There's also, you need to put that in the context of what's in a written ministerial statement and the PPG and in the NPPF. And the NPPF requires that applications should be approved if impacts are or can be made acceptable. And in the wider planning balance overall, it is for you to decide what harm arises from any conflict with this policy, if there is indeed any conflict. The view of officers is that the majority, with the exception potentially of the compelling justification, the majority of this policy has been satisfied, and therefore it has been complied with, and therefore the development plan has been complied with, and that there aren't any material considerations essentially which indicate to such an extent that a decision otherwise should be taken. So other material considerations obviously include compliance with the NPPF as a whole. In terms of the PPG, whether the applicant is required to consider whether the use has been shown to be necessary. In the written ministerial statement, again, that mentions the need to be justified by the most compelling evidence, but again, we need to put that obviously in the context of what's compelling evidence and the climate situation now. Overall planning balance, in officers' view, there would be limited harm to heritage, amenity, visual and landscape considerations, amenity of the public right-of-way, and as arising from the loss or temporary loss of best and most versatile land where it wouldn't obviously be available for food production for that period that the solar farm was on the site. And in terms of benefits, there would be a net biodiversity gain. There would be some legacy improvements to the hedgerows and trees around the site, and obviously the renewable energy generation element needs to be weighed, and in an officer's opinion that is a significant benefit, which then has led us to a recommendation that permission be granted subject to the conditions in the report. And would also like to propose a slight change to condition 10B just to make it more consistent with the Sturma solar farm proposal, which you're going to hear next, just to make it consistent with that and ensure that there is a programme for the timing of landscape works. And I think it would also be advisable to include an informative, just explaining very clearly that the expectation is for planting to be provided as soon as practically possible, and therefore justification is likely to be necessary as to why the timings have been proposed as they are. But those are the only changes which we're proposing. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Can I just, before I start, could I just seek clarification on a couple of matters? So there is a little, on the plan, there is a little area just to the south of Bakers Road, which is within the site. What is that, please?
So is it this area?
Yes, that area there.
Yeah, that area is nothing is proposed in that area. That was where the temporary construction compound was going to be, but over the course of the application, we've persuaded the applicants to move that into the site. So it would actually be where this area of planting is shown.
Okay, thank
Here.
you. Thank you. That answers that question. The second question I have is in relation to the internal hedge that's supposed to be planted along the whole length of, well, not the whole length of Long Lane, but the whole length of the solar farm that is alongside Long Lane. I've looked very carefully at that master plan. That's obviously no one can read the writing that's on there, and I can't put it up instantly myself, but looked at it very carefully, and it doesn't actually show an internal hedge. Appreciate you've said in the report that in your presentation that there will be an internal hedge, but and I didn't really see that it was secured in the conditions. So could you clarify that for me, please?
I think my interpretation of it is, when you do zoom in, is that it is the darker green area, but because it's filling the whole of that section, it doesn't read as a hedge because you haven't got a lighter bit around it, if you see what I mean. So it's merging into what's shown to be the existing hedgerow as well. But actually that area is quite a large area. The trouble is, obviously on this plan, it's a very large scale. So, you know, whilst if you see a slither of that green, you might think, well, that's not a hedgerow, but actually that is 10 metres, if you see what I mean, of hedgerow. So it is quite a large area. So it is, yeah, shown there.
Yeah. Do you want me to read the annotation out on the plan?
Yeah.
So Councillor Parker, if it would assist, sorry, I've got the plan separately. So actually on the top, the section of the plan I'm looking at here is on the top left corner where the site adjoins Long Lane. The annotation on the landscape master plan says existing hedgerow to be retained, infill planting to be determined through the hedgerow condition assessment, and be established to screen views from Long Lane. And then you've got, as Catherine said, the annotation goes down the extent of Long Lane. I think you also were asking about the internal hedgerow.
No, I wasn't really asking about that. What I meant was, I think as Catherine described it in her presentation, that there is, because obviously Long Lane, as we've seen from photographs, is bounded on either side by vegetation. I mean, it is a very ancient, very, very ancient track. But my understanding of what you were saying is that there will be completely separate hedge planted alongside it.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah, so further down, Councillor Parker, so apologies, on the plan there, Catherine, could you just put your cursor where that's, yeah, exactly, thank you. So the annotation for this part of the plan, proposed area of native tree and shrub planting along a proportion of the southern, oh no, apologies, sorry, yes, it's the, sorry, yeah, it's that one.
So, I mean, that's referring to the condition assessment which needs to be provided.
Yeah.
But if you look at the key, that bit is green, that dark green
Yeah.
is shown to be new hedgerows. This is the same as that.
Yeah.
It's in here.
So apologies, Councillor Parker. This is when my colour blindness comes to my. So yeah, the annotation along, so you can see Long Lane along that stretch. You won't be able to make out the colours on the bigger plan, but you can see the lighter green when you zoom into the landscape master plan on the right hand side of Long Lane. So on the application site side.
Okay, thank you. That's clarified that. Thank you very much. And just a further point of clarification, just in relation to the plant that is in the north eastern corner of the site. Obviously, from the photographs and from the dimensions that have been, well, actually not the photographs, the drawings and the dimensions in the report, that's probably going to be the tallest bit of the site. It's also at that point of the, I mean, it's very difficult. I've obviously walked down Long Lane and looked at it very carefully. You are actually just going over the brow of the hill towards Clare at that very far end by about 2 metres, I think. And so obviously going to be additional boundary planting along that northern boundary. But is there going to be specific planting against that plant to try to hide it, to screen it to some extent? Could you just explain what's proposed there?
So there isn't a specific scheme to try to hide it. You know, that in terms of impacts, we have acknowledged in the report in the landscape section that it would likely be visible in views from the north. But the landscape advisor did say that within the context of the pylons behind and the fact that it is relatively low, I suppose, and fair, not completely solid, that you know, it's an acknowledged impact, but it would be acceptable. They didn't advise that we have a specific scheme for screening it as such.
But can I just come back on that? Is there a technical reason why you can't screen that plant? Because
No, I mean, we do have an annotation for tree planting along that boundary. So yes, it could be required, and we certainly could put an informative onto that effect that we would be expecting further detail of that, for example, or you could add it to the condition if you wanted to, in order to specify that as if you felt it was necessary in order to grant permission for the scheme.
I personally would like that. So I think that is going to be the most visible thing. I appreciate there are pylons there as well, but you know, let's not make it any worse. I think, members, if you don't mind, as I'm ward member for this, I see a shaking of the head over there from Councillor Bowers-Flint. As I'm the ward member,
Carry on.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you.
Carry on.
Just running through, thank you very much for your presentation, Catherine. there are obviously some negatives to this application, and there is some harm to the setting of Cutbush Farm, which I think initially the Heritage Officer was quite unhappy about, but seems to be now satisfied with some additional planting around it, that he has says the harm will be a very low level of harm, and I think we must be guided by his expert advice on that, though I was a little surprised to see such a drop in his opinion, but that would be happy to be, accept his advice on that. There obviously also is going to be an impact on the users of Long Lane, which is, as you pointed out, it's a historic footpath, and obviously the other footpath, particularly Long Lane, and you will no longer be able to see glimpses of the countryside through the trees as you walk down that lane, although I appreciate it is quite dense in a lot of the way down there. So there is a degree of harm to that. And there obviously is going to be harm to the landscape character of the area, which, I mean, there's no doubt about it, this is effectively an industrialisation of the countryside, of a very substantial area. But having said that, I do note that we have commissioned our own experts to look at the visual impact, and given the topography, which is relatively flat actually, and the additional screening, I think the fact that there's actually a very small section along the road is quite positive. I think I could accept that it is possible that the visual impact will be pretty limited as a whole. My main concern, and I think I've raised this before on other applications, is the loss of valuable farmland. There is obviously a loss of, according to the applicants, soil experts, and I know we don't have an independent analysis of soil, and I understand that soil analysis is can be quite subjective, but that's the only evidence we've got before us, and there is 56% of that is classified as best and most versatile land. I mean, my general issue with these applications is the sequential test, because these solar farms can go anywhere in the country where there is sufficient sunlight. I mean, they're even putting them in County Durham, I think, now. So it might, for me, I think I'm surprised it was the starting point is not the agricultural land classification maps, which covers the whole country and clearly shows that this area is grade 2 land in general. And I'm surprised that that's not the starting point in people like BSR Energy, who could put solar farms anywhere across the country. I mean, would choose a site that is within an area marked on the ALC map as grade 2. I would have thought they would discount that completely and look elsewhere into the grade 3 land, and that should be their starting point. So I do have an issue with the approach to sequential assessment. And then that brings us again to the argument of compelling evidence. Is there a compelling reason why we should be using best and most versatile land over a land of a lesser quality? I think the main reason why the applicants have chosen this bit of land is because of the point of connection to the local distribution network. I think that presumably there are other possibilities of connecting to the distribution network across the country. So for me, I don't find that as a very compelling reason. So that's where I am, members, on this. So now I do have quite a few comments I'd like to consider the conditions quite carefully. So I'd like to pick up those a bit later, but I'll now hand it over to members. Who would like to? Councillor Hooks.
Following on what you said, of course, at the last full council meeting, we passed a motion about food security and how we use our land and protecting our agricultural land. So, supporting what Councillor Parker just said, it does go against the grain a little bit. My one question at the moment is condition 30, where it says about the cease of the 6 months, and then the equipment being removed, but there's no time for the whole site to be there, or what I can see. Is it 30 years, 40 years? Should there be an end date in there when it will be decommissioned and back to agricultural land? Thank you.
So it is within your gift to impose an end date. I think the projected lifespan of this particular site is 40 years. Again, I think you would have to satisfy yourselves that it's necessary in order that it would be unacceptable unless you applied this condition, and your reasons for that, as they haven't actually applied for a temporary consent. This is a request for a permanent consent, effectively. But you know, I think we acknowledge, as the PPG acknowledges, solar farms are temporary by nature.
Thank you. To answer your question, Councillor Hooks.
Yeah, it's disappointed that there isn't an end date, because obviously, I mean, technology is going to change over the next, over the next few years. So, you know, if you have something there, obviously it could change, and then obviously we would have another application to put something else in instead. And I think, you know, if this is passed tonight, I think residents would want to know when the end was in sight, rather than some arbitrary, well, it's going to be here, you know, forever and ever and ever. You know, we've passed ones before that had a 40-year lifespan. Still a long time, but if it is, but you say this one isn't actually a temporary application, it's actually a proper to be there forever.
Yeah, so just to clarify, so in terms of, so taking you back to the description of the proposal, so it's been applied for, it's not been applied for on a temporary basis, but as Catherine said, this is within members' gift in terms of if that condition, if members felt that condition should be imposed, it could be, but you just need to satisfy yourself in terms of the reason for that. But yeah, as you've referenced, other solar farms have been proposed as for a 40-year period or for a temporary period, and as such it's been conditioned like that on the consent. So that's within members' remit this evening.
Councillor Spray.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much. Well, we have two applications on the agenda tonight, both for solar farms, and I am absolutely sure there will be more coming forward, because that is the way of things now. And they are not going to be easy to make a decision on, because I think the nature of them is that they are controversial for their local communities. Yes, ideally, solar farms or energy schemes should take place on brownfield land. I think nobody probably disagrees with that, but we have a tiny amount of brownfield land in this district, really small. We have a proliferation, as it's described in the report, of high quality agricultural land. Now, that is not to say that every single application for a solar farm that we get, we're going to say, well, we'll grant it because we've got lots of agricultural land, so it doesn't matter if we do this one and this one and so on. I'm not saying that. Each application has got to be taken on its merits. But unlike other areas in the country, we do not have a lot of brownfield land. I think with this application, there are, as Catherine, and thank you very much for your presentation, Catherine, because it was really quite complex. The Heritage Officer has identified a very low level of harm. Landscape have said yes, there will be a limited loss of trees and hedgerows, but that will be more than compensated for by biodiversity enhancements. We've got no objections from highways, and I know that that is, well, that the local people who obviously know the area well don't agree with that, and maybe some members don't agree with that, but the Highways Authority, they are the lead authority on roads and transport for us, and as a district we have to take their professional opinion, and their opinion is that there is no reason on highways grounds why this should not go ahead. And the application is, I think, compliant with policies LPP 72 and 73, which very helpfully we've got copies of this evening. I think also there are two things which I'm sure I don't need to remind my colleagues on the committee of. We have to have really sound planning reasons to make any decision, whether it's for or against. But if it's refusal, we have to be absolutely sure that those reasons will be defendable at an appeal, should it come to that. You know, if we think we've got sound enough reasons, fine, but they have to be sound planning reasons. And the other thing which I think we all need to bear in mind, the government's position on this, the new government, which they made very clear within days of coming into power, their position on green energy is that they support schemes, whether it's onshore wind turbines or solar farms. They expect them to come forward and they expect them to be supported unless there is really clear demonstrable harm that they should be refused. And I know that's a national position for government, but I think we do have to bear that in mind. I think they've already overturned at least one that I can think of, and it may be more, refusal for quite big energy schemes in the country. So we have an application here which I know there are very strong local objections and from the parish council, but other than that, none of the statutory consultees have objected, and where they say there may be harm, they go on to say, but that can be mitigated and overcome, and it is compliant with our two main energy policies. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Spray. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. First comment is about the landscape master plan and relating to your questions. I don't know if there's anyone in this room with bionic man or woman eyesight, but I can't read that. I've said it before at previous planning committees. Why do developers produce plans with such tiny, tiny writing? I mean, most of what we do in public life, we're expected to produce documents with text which is readable by the average eyesight and helpful to people with less than average eyesight. I mean, that's ridiculous. The only thing I could think officers could get around that is to have broken it up into compartments, which might have helped. I don't know. You'd probably have to blow it up times 100. Anyway, I thought I'd make that point. This is quite a large site, over 100 acres in old money, and the landscape plan and the photographs I think were helpful in showing that, as far as I could see, someone with some experience in the field, that this is going to be quite visible in the early years until that landscaping comes forward, the planting. It is going to be quite visible from public vantage points such as the public right-of-way and the local roads. The main harms, the loss of BMV, 56%, landscape, public rights-of-way, potentially wildlife, HGV access. I think that's a major concern in rural areas, but it's temporary. But I don't think we can dismiss it. I think somewhere in the report said it was negligible. I doubt HGVs going down those small lanes is going to be negligible. The number of CCTV cameras and their height's been reduced, which is good, but there's still going to be over 100 of them. Sheep grazing, I'll come back to that in a minute. That was a reason the Essex Wildlife Trust raised concern about how that impacted the biodiversity net gain of the wildflowers. Skylarks, I think that's been dealt with because apparently there's a mitigation plan to re-provide within the landowner's gift. But I think, as previous councillors have said, it's this argument about best and most versatile land, which we've covered many times before. We see report after report like this one saying, well, most of the district is BMV, whether it's actually solar panels or whether it's housing. But that's like, and we've got very little brownfield, but that's like a get out of jail free card, isn't it, for developers? It's just, well, we haven't got anywhere else to put it because it's all like that. And that then, I think, undermines the whole argument about the balance and whether we can say there's a compelling argument. Because if each time we're saying, well, actually, it's BMV, but there's not a lot we can do about it, I don't know how we come to the correct conclusion about that balance. I read it time and time again this afternoon, and I think it's a difficult one. And the fact is, we are historically losing our agricultural land at a very high rate. It's not just solar farms, it's houses, quarries, roads, commercial parks and other developments. And I think I've made this point before, we need a national plan. We need the government to say, we've only got so much land, how are we actually going to plan this? Because currently I think it's piecemeal to say the least. Clearly the major benefit is the renewable energy and the contribution that makes to reducing greenhouse gases, and that is incredibly important. The science is getting stronger and stronger on that. However, I'll make the same point I always do, is we also need to do far more to stop wasting energy, and we need to be more efficient. Generating is one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is what we do with it. And we're still waiting to see if this government will do any more than the last government in putting more solar where it should be, which is on rooftops, both new developments and retrofitting existing ones. So it comes down to this balance of benefits and harms. At the moment, I'm leaning towards the benefits outweighing the harms, but I'll wait to hear what others are going to say. And it is about renewable energy for me. But just two questions for officers. One is all the planting going to be native? I presume in a rural area like this it should be. And secondly, could you say a little bit more detail about that sheep versus wildflowers bit? Are the sheep going to be allowed to graze the entire area the whole time, or will there be some type of phasing to allow wildflower areas to flourish without being grazed? Thank you.
Yeah, so just in terms of the grazing, I'll cover that first actually. I think the sheep would need to be contained, so they would predominantly be in these fenced areas. As part of the management plan, it would be necessary to specify the grazing intensities and times of year that they were able to be grazed. And I think in these areas, it's not predominantly wildflowers, so it's mostly grasses with a foraging component. So you don't have the same, if you have sheep in there in the summertime, they wouldn't necessarily be preventing wildflowers, because there aren't any wildflowers in there. The wildflowers are what's benefiting the butterflies and quite a lot of the other sort of nectar foraging species. Those areas would be around the edges of the site, outside of the grazed areas. So yeah, it would need to be considered as to grazing intensity and times of year, mowing regime, etc., would all have to be covered within that. And sorry, just oh yes, the native planting is so far. I've looked through the list and I can't see anything which isn't native. So yeah, I mean obviously can't see it right now, but yeah, from my recollection, there isn't anything in there which stood out as not being native.
Could I just comment on that, Councillor? But I did notice that there was proposal to put silver birches, which I don't think would be terribly appropriate. Silver birches. Native, happy with that? Okay. Probably don't really like clay soil, but there we go.
Well, yeah, I mean, it may be something that, once it's been scrutinised by a landscape professional, that they're not happy with having silver birches, so then they would ask for those to be taken out, not appropriate.
Any other members wish to comment on this application? Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Compelling reasons. There's a phrase for you. I'm struggling slightly because to find a compelling reason to jump one way or another on this application. I tend to sympathise with Councillor Abbott's position that, on balance, the importance of delivering renewable energy outweighs many of the concerns, but my concerns are significant, and I just wanted to outline a couple of them. One of them is relates to whether sequential tests are actually credible and whether they seek enough information on places other than the site that's proposed to allow a balanced assessment of whether this site is the best one. And without that, it becomes really difficult to make a compelling argument for using best and most versatile land, especially when it reaches grade 2. Because whilst we've got plenty of it in our lovely district, there are other parts of the country where there is precious little of it. And I really can't just allow this to go through without supporting the comments about the need to balance issues such as security of energy supply, which is covered off in the report, and security of food supply. And we don't have to go back as far as the Second World War to realise just how challenging that can be for us in a country where the geopolitical situation around us has become more difficult, let's say, and we are so dependent on our ports and they're remaining open to actually get enough food into this country to look after our population. And so security of food supply is an important consideration. This council has passed a motion supporting the need to deliver security of food supply, and logically, given what we've heard about just how much best and most versatile land we've got here, that is a significant responsibility for us when we're making these determinations. So I'd just like to point out, to me, some of the evidence which is presented is difficult to believe provides a compelling case for what is proposed. And I will listen to other arguments, I hope, before making my decision as to how I shall vote. But I would like to ask one question of our officers, and it refers to the landscape plan, which that helpfully is still up in front of us. During the agent's speech this evening, which was quite detailed, one of his statements was it also includes generous setback between the solar panels and Baker's Road, and I was wondering whether the officers can point on the plan to where they think that generous setback can be seen.
So I think what's being referred to is this area here. Is again, I think you have to appreciate the scale here. You know, this is, I couldn't tell you exactly how many metres it is, but it is probably about 15 metres or more. So, and this area is much more than that. So that there would be, obviously I've explained there's a hedgerow along here. You might be able to see it potentially if I show you. Yeah, so it would go in here. If that was just trees, then this is an out-of-date plan, you see, because it's advanced so much more. We got that hedgerow put in all the way along, and we got the buffer area put in for scrub here, where the temporary construction compound, once that's finished with. So I think that's what's being referred to along here. So I think over time it is fair to say that once you'd gapped up the existing hedgerow and then added another hedgerow and then added some scrub area, that from Baker's Road itself it would be quite difficult to see the panels from like the the gap here, which would be the access, because there's no views across because of this scrub area. So, you know, over time, but obviously, yeah, you know, in its first instance, that landscaping wouldn't be going in as mature. So, you know, there would be a period where it would be visible.
Thank you. One last issue which I would like to raise, and that relates to the end of the 40 years period that this is expected to last. Personally, I have to admit that I'm sceptical of whether we can take these 40-year notions of temporality terribly seriously, because the reality, and I speak as somebody who's invested in solar panels himself, that the solar panels have a life expectancy of just over half the 40-year period. On that basis, you can reasonably expect that it is economically sensible for the developers or owners of the site to replace panels as they fail going forward. Now, my arithmetic tells me that when we get to the end of 40 years, we could very easily still have a highly viable, in terms of the economics and the export potential for the energy, a highly viable site. And at that point, my understanding is that a further planning application could come forward in the future. So irrespective of what we do here, it could be rolled over. But despite that, I would still like to make the case for a strong condition around decommissioning at the end of the appropriate time. There are two things that I'd like to ask the officers whether we could condition. The first one is, how do we determine when the site is no longer viable? That could be affected by all sorts of conditions, including, I think in 30 years' time, and throughout my lifetime it's been this, we're expecting to have fusion energy online, and we'll have miniature versions of the sun. I mean, that would change absolutely everything. So this issue goes to that. How do we determine that this site is no longer viable? And we're not the experts in that. But I would like to ask the officers whether it is possible to ask for one simple thing from the owners of the site, if it's consented, and it's this, that this council receives an annual report stating the output, the export level of energy from the site, so that we have a way, if we choose to take that evidence to experts, of determining whether that is still a viable site and whether indeed it's doing anything. Because one worry for me is that at the end of the time when it's viable, it just gets left there and everybody just walks away. So that's the first thing that I would like to ask our officers on conditioning. And the second thing is, I would like to ask our officers whether we can do something a little more rigorous in terms of conditioning what the words decommissioning and restored mean in the context of LPP 73. And what I'd like to suggest is that decommissioned includes the complete removal of all materials. Why would I be labouring that? Because we've got 2.5 metre long piles going into ground, and a lot of them. If, for the sake of argument, somebody did a fast and dirty removal and just went round as they would today with a battery-powered disc cutter and cut off the uprights at ground level, that would not be agricultural land fit for, you couldn't plough it. So I think it's really important that we condition the complete removal of all materials. So that's the first thing. The second is, and I've spoken to quite a few of our local landowners, because I do live up in the north, and that if you run sheep on agricultural land that you normally use for cereal crops and what have you, sheep, because of the nature of the way they graze, move, and their physiology, and particularly with their feet, if you want to call them that, they compact the surface of the soil. And having spoken to farmers, I realised that it can take several years to turn that field round so that it works as efficiently again for cereal production. And I speak not as an expert, I speak as somebody who asked the people to actually do it. So the next thing is, with respect to the word restored in LPP 73, can we stipulate that that means restoring the ground conditions from an agricultural sense to the way it was at the outset of the project, to make sure that it is genuinely restored and could go, as best it's possible, straight back into the production of food if that was necessary. Thank you.
Before you answer that question, can I just, I'm too concerned about how you enforce condition 30, particularly the aspect of condition 30 which talks about when energy production ceases. And obviously this is this is minimum 40-year period. Who knows what's going to happen in 5 years' time, let alone 10 years' time, let alone 20 years' time. But I do know that, and I'm pretty sure I'm right on this, I hope I'm not saying something that's incorrect, but pretty sure that there's this is effectively contracts for difference, so pricing structure for solar, which is, I think it lasts for 15 years, and so there's sort of a guaranteed sort of price structure for that. Who knows what will happen at the end of that period, so it concerns me that they don't become viable. I also know that a lot of these solar panels come from China. Well, in fact, nearly all of them come from China. The EU, I think, are putting tariffs on solar panels from China. I think that could happen here. You know, the whole sort of economics could change, and at which point this condition 30 becomes how we as a council would know, whoever is in charge at that time, would know that electricity production has ceased. Because you obviously can't tell by just looking at the plant. Sorry, Chris.
So thank you for your questions, Councillor Holland and Councillor Parker. So if possible, I'm just going to ask Catherine just to comment and respond on the point around whether or not electricity is still being generated on the site and how that would be possible. And then if I may, I'll come back then on the issue of the viability point, the wording of the conditions, and just that last point in terms of the enforceability of the condition, if that's okay.
Yeah, and there's a myriad of options which could be sort of incorporated into a condition. So first thing, you could ask them to confirm when energy generation starts to be exported, so that when that 40-year period, when it becomes the site becomes operational. So then obviously you then know when the 40 years is. Then in terms of if it ceased for a period of 6 months or more before that 40-year period, then I think that would need to be reliant upon enforcement investigations taking place. So, you know, an inquiry would come in saying it potentially not being used anymore. So an officer would go out to the site, use their powers of entry, discern, because you can hear whether the fans are running in the inverters, etc., and whether those are going round. You could ask for access to the power, to the control room, in order to establish whether the electricity is on, etc. And inquire. You can formally request information from the applicant in relation to whether they are still operating on the site or not. It is, yes, slightly more difficult. I think in terms of logs and that type of thing, obviously then that would require the planning office to, you could have a mechanism where they send them in, but then would officers really want them? Probably not. You probably only want them, when you're about to inquire as to whether it ceased or not. So they would need to be provided on demand. I'm not sure what form they would take, And just in terms of viability, again, that's not really a decision I think that a planning officer can make as to whether it's viable or not, but I think Chris is probably going to, fill in on that.
So thanks, Catherine. So just picking up that point of viability, so Councillor Holland, that was a point that you raised. I'd just take you back to policy LPP 73, so where the policy is specifically talking around decommissioning, this is where the 6-month period comes in, and there's specific reference within that policy to the use effectively ceasing or becoming non-functioning. I think the point, so I understand the issue that you're raising in terms of viability, and obviously our role this evening is purely to provide advice. Members are here to make the decision, but I think my advice to you on that point would be, it would be very difficult, I think, for the planning authority to determine what isn't viable in terms of energy generation from the site. So if you were thinking that if it fell below a certain productivity level, I'm not sure the basis upon which we could prescribe that. Essentially, the way the condition is worded at the moment is based effectively on the principles established by LPP 73, which is if the use ceases, then therefore the site should be restored, and that makes it much more clear cut in terms of, well, we can establish over a period of time, which is the 6-month period reference in the policy, that the use has ceased, the site therefore needs to be restored to a previous condition. So I think my advice would be on the viability, that would be very difficult and I think would be quite problematic to try to condition, and I think that would also potentially be problematic for the from the applicant side as well. So my advice purely in terms of enforceability of the condition, it's very clear that we'd be able to establish if the site was not in use and therefore the condition kicks in, or if the site is still in use, it therefore doesn't kick in at that point. And then obviously it's been raised this evening about a temporary permission. Obviously the decommissioning, what we're talking about here would be in the context within the lifespan of the permission, should members be minded, on a temporary basis, because obviously at the end of that period the decommissioning would kick in unless, as you said, there is a grant of permission to continue on the site. But that's a separate application, that's a separate process, that's not for consideration this evening. So that would be my point on the viability. Catherine's touched on the point around putting an onus on the applicant to provide us with that evidence. Again, my advice around that would be that if members felt really strongly, I would suggest that's limited to making something available on request. But I think, as Catherine's referenced, it would be possible to establish whether or not the site was in use or not from a visit and from inquiries. In terms of the decommissioning point and your point around sheep grazing and compaction, and in terms of restoring soil, obviously it's within members' gift to add additional conditions, boost the wording of additional conditions, and certainly condition 30 could be amended and strengthened. I think if members are minded to do that, I would actually say that, so within the report we've attached several appeal decisions, but the Thaxted appeal decision, which you will find on page 112 and 113, for condition 25, which deals with the soil issue, and I think it's condition 26, which deals with decommissioning. So these would be PIN standard conditions. I don't often praise PINs sometimes in terms of the decisions they make, but I have to say that actually they are two quite well-worded conditions and could form the basis, again, if members are minded to boost what you want to secure here, they could form the basis. I think the only thing I would suggest, if members want to go down that route, I'd suggest that the principles, are clear in terms of what we're trying to establish. I think we'd probably want to look at the detailed wording of those to get those right, because it's obviously they're quite detailed wording, and we would probably need to adjust that. So that would be my response on that front. And I hopefully... Oh no, sorry, Councillor Parker, you also raised the point around enforceability. So again, it would be, I think from our perspective, it would be possible to establish if the use of the site has ceased, and therefore the enforcement route would kick in. So obviously the powers that are available to the LPA would be the serving of an enforcement notice, and then there is obviously, if that is not subject to appeal and the or wait, so it takes effect, or if it is subject to appeal, but the appeal is dismissed and the notice takes effect but not complied with, there's follow-up enforcement that the LPA is able to do to ensure compliance with the notice.
Thank you, Chris. I sort of hadn't sort of realised about the noise made from the inverters, but yeah, that's great. Did you want to?
So this is just a procedural question. Can we make a decision this evening and cover off the fine detail on this condition outside and agree it with members?
Yeah, as long as I think we just need to be clear in terms of what conditions you would want to amend or add, and then we can go away, work the wording, and then the standard process would be we would send that to the mover, the seconder, and the chair and vice chair to agree. But that's on the basis in terms of members moving forward with a positive decision, obviously.
Councillor Stewart, I know you want to speak. I was just going to ask a question about the point actually made by Councillor Knott about the traffic. Would you like to raise your point now? Just wait till I'm happy to let you speak now, or would you like to just wait until I've covered that point off?
Chair, I'm quite happy for you to speak after you've covered your point. Thank you.
Councillor, yes. I think Councillor Knott is completely right about construction traffic, and I think what concerned me about the applicant's traffic survey was for some reason they surveyed the A131, which is absolutely nowhere near the site. So they did 4 surveys. 2 were on the A131, which I don't think would be used by any traffic. It's obviously a major A road. Other one was the A1017, which is fine because traffic probably would go down there, or depending which direction it's coming from. I think they've surveyed Gosfield. So, and then they surveyed Baker's Road itself. So I've got several issues here. I mean, you saw from the photographs, Baker's Road, this is actually a fairly small stretch there, but it is literally one car ride and wide. I drive along it all the time. If I meet the car coming the other way, I stop and try to put over on the verge and let it go past. I appreciate there's a lot of information, proposals about the access. That's been looked at carefully by Highways. That's all good. The additional in and out access is good. Just a small point. I think the applicant was suggesting reducing the 60-mile limit to 40 miles an hour. Personally, I would never drive along that road at 40 miles an hour. I think it should be reduced to 20 miles an hour or 25 miles an hour. I wonder if that small suggestion could be made. But my bigger concern really is Tilbury Road and Tilbury Hill, which Tilbury Hill goes through Tilbury Juxta-Clare itself, and there are 2 very, very nasty right-hand bends on that road. I use that road very regularly. I have spoken to residents who live along that road, not in connection with this application, but just I know that they are in the process of submitting an application to the local highways panel, as mentioned, about the road width and trying to get some width restriction or some weight restriction or something to just try and reduce the traffic. That the applicant has not assessed the suitability of that road for construction traffic at all, which is disappointing, frankly. If Highways are basing their assessment on what the applicant has produced, no one has assessed it. I don't know what Highways have assessed. But I would like the construction management plan to cover, in particular, Tilbury Road. Quite like it to cover going through Great Yeldham itself, actually, because children do cross the road there going to school, to and from school. And Tilbury Hill, to look at how that construction traffic can be managed. And yeah, that's possible.
Yeah, just so I'll provide some background on the information that's submitted as part of the application. So there is a highway statement which has been submitted that shows that the proposed route for construction traffic, it does show very clearly, would come off the A road through Tilbury Road, Clare Road, and up onto Bakers Road. So that the Highway Authority will have read that and will realise that obviously that is the route that is proposed. We don't have another alternative route suggested which is proposed to be more suitable. The Highway Authority then will have agreed with the applicant sampling points in order to ascertain whether there's, what the change in traffic levels is essentially. So that's the trigger for further assessment. So when the traffic level is over 10% of the existing traffic levels, then that triggers further assessment. So they sampled the A road, didn't find that there would be a 10% difference. They found on Bakers Road that there would be. Obviously, that would be where Bakers Road would be where the most impacts would be. So they would potentially have, the worst case scenario, I suppose, identified by sampling Bakers Road. Now, if you feel that there are additional parameters which are a concern along the rest of that route, then we need to discuss those in detail. However, the Highway Authority does read what's on the file, so they would have read the representations, they would have read the parish responses, so they will have considered those aspects. We have to bear in mind that at its very worst, so for the peak month, it's 8 deliveries a day of HGV movements. The road itself is very lightly trafficked at the moment, so that would be obviously a big difference. However, in terms of impacts, I suppose you have to bear in mind that road isn't restrictive for HGV use. Chris might have further comments. I expect you probably want to come in as well.
Yeah, so I haven't got much to say. I mean, I think the key thing really for members making decision, obviously the local planning authority is not the highway authority. That is the responsibility of Essex County Council, and the response is very clear that they raise no objection. So again, it's within members' gift, and specifically I think you're referring to condition 25, Councillor Parker, but the highway authority have obviously reviewed this. It's not our position as officers to disagree with that, because we're not highway authorities, we're not the experts in that field, and we have to take the advice of the statutory consultee, and we always run into difficulty if we were not to do so. So that's really the only point. In addition, I just wanted to reiterate, but I think Catherine's responded to the background.
Okay, no, I understand that. I think the point is that from that, obviously we've got local knowledge of that area, very deep, I've lived there a long, long time. I think what people don't understand is that Tilbury Road, if you come into Tilbury, you turn left to go into Ovington, and then before you get to Bakers Road, you turn left to go to Clare. So if you're just assessing Bakers Road, you're not assessing the traffic that's on the rest of the route. Also, if you come up into Tilbury, and you don't turn left to go to Ovington, but you continue into Belsham St Paul, and again, I think the point I'm trying to make is that Tilbury Road carries 3 times as much traffic, if not more, well, a lot more, to be honest, because unfortunately those roads are used as cut-throughs, as has been described, and a lot more than Bakers Road. So if you're just relying on assessment of the traffic volume on Bakers Road, you have not assessed the traffic volume on Tilbury Hill. And I think all I'm asking is that the construction traffic management plan would cover just trying to manage Tilbury, the traffic through Tilbury Juxta Clare in particular, and on Tilbury Hill. Would that be possible to amend that management plan?
So so Councillor Parker is, with all the conditions, it's within members' gift to add conditions, amend existing conditions. So if you're looking to add an additional requirement to condition 25, we'd need to look at the wording. But that's obviously within members' gift if you feel strongly along that. I think we've given advice obviously in terms of the highway position. And all I would say again is if we add an additional requirement, we would still need the advice from the Highway Authority. So, you know, it may well be that we still get to the same position. Obviously, you know, the applicant can always appeal against conditions as well, so that just needs to be mindful. But ultimately, it's the planning committee role here tonight to make decisions. We can only offer you advice, so it's within members' gift.
Thank you for that, Chris. Councillor Swift, sorry, I knew you forgot.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just wanted to really comment on this application, because I think it's really important. I think several mentions have already been made about the fact that most of the statutory consultees have got no objection, including Essex County Council with regards to highways. And with regards to that, I think that point is quite important, because also, even at harvest time, or even in the middle of winter, all farms in the area are going to have right of access, and they may well have 10 trucks a day, 38 tonners travelling on the road. So even though it may be a small road, there are lots of farms around in North Essex that have a lot of HGV traffic at certain peaks and uses on the roads, and our roads, I believe, can quite accept that kind of traffic. After all, we are concerned about our food security, so we need the trucks to go there. This application is obviously 53 hectares, and I think because of the government guidelines and our own energy policies, and also our strategy that is lined up with our climate action as well, the renewables on this and the potential energy of 37.5 mega gigawatts per year, which is enough to power potentially 12,000 houses per annum, is quite significant. And that is also in line with government principles of renewable energy as well, and the idea that we become self-sufficient eventually, moving towards energy. Yes, there are a couple of public rights of way, but I think they have been well covered off by members' comments, and also I think the officers have taken due care and attention of that. Unfortunately, the actual piece of land itself, as we have heard, is about 130 acres. It's fortunate that it's fairly level, because being level, actually, as soon as the hedgerows are grown and being infilled post-construction, it will mean that that site will virtually be unseen by anything in the surrounding. And as you saw in one of the slides, indicating there's a lot of existing hedgerows going along those lanes and roads currently. And of course, the height of the solar panels, as we have heard, is 2.6 metres. The deer fencing is 1.9 metres. And of course, that is not very high for a hedge to get up. It's important to keep the deer out and possibly the sheep in. And I'd like to just make a point. Sheep have got a reputation of having a golden hoof. Their compaction level is amazingly low. They do far more benefit to the ground than any harm. And I think I can speak with some experience as somebody who was born with sheep in my pocket on my farm, my family farm. And as a third-generation farmer, I do have a little bit of knowledge about that. So I would suggest that actually the management of a solar farm with the use of sheep, with regards to whether it's herbal lays or wildflowers, is quite adequate management for maintaining a solar farm. And that would then reinforce the biodiversity net gain, which we are also concerned about these days. There's going to be an increase in hedgerows, and there has been, with regards to the harm to those listed properties, has been stated, I think has been laid out very clearly by officers what they are. So we've gone through tonight all of those points, and I completely can understand some of the local objections. But it has been mentioned tonight about the industrialisation of the countryside. Well, the countryside has been quite industrialised since the Second World War. And actually, if you look at much of our crop rotation currently, it is a lot of it monoculture. And the great thing about the current government change in environmental benefits is actually bringing about greater biodiversity gain. It's actually bringing about increasing the carbon in our soils, about increasing the better management of our soils to produce more. I'd just like to mention about the comments with regards to self-sufficiency, and it is true that we did have that motion recently, but actually in England we are self-sufficient in cereal crops. What we are not self-sufficient in is vegetables and fruit. And yes, we do import crops, but some of those are high protein, and because of the market, they come in, but we are self-sufficient in those. And the amount of land that we are talking about tonight is 53 hectares and 130 acres. We're not talking about hundreds and hundreds of acres taking out of farm production. We're not actually taking away farm production. It's a solar farm. A farm is productive, and this farm is going to produce energy. And the state of the land going in it, and I agree with the comments about how long it's going to last and maybe condition it, it should simply say that it should be returned to condition the day before it was actually handed over as a solar farm. So there are enormous benefits to the public as well. And I also think there is the opportunity for diversification and to support agriculture, because agriculture is actually having quite a tough time in some respects with regards to yields and what they can do and the costs and the profitability. In order to have that food security for generations to come, there is potentially for those agricultural farms that are close enough to a hookup point, and this is my main point, that the reason this application has come in tonight is because of the direct closeness and usefulness of joining to the national grid. It's very far. We've seen how close it is. This won't be the first solar farm application that comes to BDC. Because of the closeness of a hookup point into a substation, it is very useful and it is cost effective. Regardless of what you think about a solar farm, that is going to be a governing factor, I think, in the future of applications. And we won't be unique in Braintree District Council about that. So I think there's a lot to consider there, but I think overall, the comments that have been made, but I just would like to again mention the reason that this application is so close to that substation. It's renewable energy, it's for 40 years, the biodiversity net gain increases, the reduction in carbon, and also it is going to potentially give the farms an opportunity to diversify, which is what the government is also saying, so that they can reinvest some of this money into the future of their farm to carry on with the tools potentially to produce our food in the future as well. So I would move officers' recommendations subject to any amendments that are made by the committee.
Before I find a seconder on that, there is actually just one little thing I forgot to ask Catherine about in terms of the landscaping. Just this amended condition, condition 10. So it is condition, amended condition 10B. So is this an additional condition? Do we have a 10B? I can't remember whether we had a 10B.
We had a 10B, yes.
Did we? Okay. Oh, yes, sorry. It was, there were several parts to condition 10, weren't there? Yeah. Okay. It's just together with the programme detailing the timing of landscaping works. I mean, I think the concern for many people is, having seen the solar farm in Pentlow, which was granted permission several years ago, they haven't put in one single plant, hedgerow, any hedging plant at all yet, hopefully this winter. But I think the concern for a lot of members is a lot of residents is the visibility for a very long period of time before the hedging is even planted, let alone got established. Can we be a bit stronger on requiring, and it's different, not so much, I don't have so much of an issue with this particular site, but particularly the perimeter planting where there is none at all. Can we, would it be possible to require that to go in early, but sort of before construction, really. Would that be reasonable to ask that?
So I think there may be elements which need to be established before, such as the construction compound and the access to it, because that's obviously where some of the plants might be being stored, etc., and where deliveries would take place. So I don't know if we could say prior to commencement, if you see what I mean. Yes, but certainly with the use of that condition, and obviously having it flagged through the informative really helps, because it does focus the attention on the fact that our expectation is that it will be as soon as possible. We will be querying why that needs, if it's not as soon as we think it can be, why is that the case? And so that does allow us that mechanism. I don't know if we can be any more prescriptive about it.
Thank you. That's given me some reassurance. Did you want to say something, Councillor Hooks?
Another question, or not? This is referring back to my first point, actually, and Councillor Swear, and I think both Councillor Holland and Councillor Swear both mentioned 40 years, but that's not what we've got in front of us. It's indefinite, isn't it? So, Councillor Swear says, 40 years and then, back to being, agricultural land, but that's not what we've got here for agreement. So, as a council, are we happy to agree that solar panels could be on that land indefinitely, or do we want to put a time limit on it?
So I think we've sort of got to the point that in this discussion we've had quite a lot of discussion about conditions, including a proposal to put a 40-year time limit on it. We've had discussions about additional screening around the plant. We've had discussions about beefed up decommissioning plan, a beefed up soil management plan. What else? With some discussions about my point about construction management. How should we deal with this in terms of, should we seek agreement on those conditions, or how do we proceed? Chris, sorry, Emma.
So I think it's obviously for members to decide if additional or amended conditions are required. It's within the committee's decision to decide what that is. So we can provide some advice, we can go away, we can agree the detailed wording, and we're clear on, but we just need to be clear in terms of what members are seeking to add, seeking to amend. So we're in your hands, Madam Chairman, on that front.
So, Councillor Joe, I mean, what's been discussed so far is a 40-year amend condition 30 to add a 40-year time limit, to amend condition 30 to which this will have to go back to move and seconded the condition 30 on decommissioning, an amendment to condition 10 about screening around the plant with additional soil management plan as similar to the one in the Thaxted appeal. I mean, I would like to see an amendment to condition 25, which deals construction management, just to deal with how the traffic around Tilbury Hill and Tilbury Juxta Clare is going to be dealt with, and also a reduction in the speed limit along Bakers Road during the construction down to 25 miles an hour, maybe. Are you happy with, Catherine? Is that?
So condition 25, I think the best way to approach that might be to approve. I mean, it says it has to be consistent with the construction management plan submitted, doesn't it? But I think we'd need to also then, prior to commencement, requiring additional addendum or additional report on those particular elements, so that we could approve those as well, because they're not obviously in this current construction traffic management plan.
I think we'd need to have a think about the wording, because we either need to do something like that, Councillor Parker, or it would have to be, effectively a construction management plan should be submitted for approval when we start. We effectively require a new management plan to be submitted, but it would be one of, or a revised one. But I think we just need to be clear in terms of if members of the committee want to amend that condition, we can obviously take that away. But yeah, if there's specific requirements in there, we just need to be clear on what prescriptive elements need to be within that condition. I think, again, just on the highways point, I would be careful about specifying speed limits, because that's not something, you know, we would be reliant on the Highway Authority on that front. So we can certainly require revised details to come forward, but the speed I would be concerned about in terms of being prescriptive on.
Fair enough. So it was just something that had been suggested by the applicant, but presumably the highways were happy with it. Okay, I'm happy to not pursue that. Councillor Schroer, are you happy with those suggestions as you've moved this?
I'm not really quite clear on the suggestions, but I'm quite.
Shall I just run through them for you and for
I
members
think
for members of committee? So, sorry, it is.
Yes. Can we just, I mean, I agree with all the things you've put forward. I don't know whether other members are, but I think they're all perfectly sensible and that they all ought to be added as conditions to the original proposal by Councillor Schreer. I mean, can you not just say that you want those to be put forward, you're moving it, I'll second it, and then see what people say. Alternatively, take each one by one and put each one to the vote.
They don't have the wording yet.
Chairman, we've got Councillor who's moved the motion, and that needs to be dealt with unless Councillor Sweat is content to withdraw from that motion. So it would allow for the suggestion to proceed as outlined by Councillor Finken. Members have to be clear in what they are approving this evening in terms of any amendments to those conditions. So it would be assistance to the committee, the decision making, and anybody observing this meeting that they are clear in what the authority has made a decision upon this evening, and then also that then guides the officers when formulating the precise word and the conditions going forward. So, Chairman, first of all, I'd seek to ask whether Councillor Sweat is prepared to withdraw his move the officer's motion, so that's taken off the table, and then proceed as outlined as Councillor Finken suggests, but members do need to be clear what they are agreeing to.
Councillor Spray.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to, I don't know if I'm going to be helpful or not. What has happened in the past, and I think not for a while, is that we have agreed the principle of some additional conditions and amendments. Officers have then gone away and come up with the correct wording, and have then gone back to the mover and seconder and said, this is what we are suggesting, are you happy with that? So we agree what we want in the way of additional or amendments and conditions, but the precise wording officers then go away and work on, because quite often they have to go away and have a think about it. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
I think, Councillor, would you be willing to withdraw your movement just while we just clarify for everybody exactly what has, because we have had a lot of discussion about a lot of conditions. Are you happy to do that or not?
Madam Chairman, I'm not sure that I really need to withdraw that, because I think, following the report, the detailed discussion that we had, taking into account all of that, plus the report, plus officers' recommendation and government guidelines, I think I wish to continue. I have moved that motion and wish to continue with the motion, and I think it's now with the guidance of legal and officers as to how we accept any modification to the planning conditions there. Because it sounds like they may be slightly complicated because some of them are unknown. So I just wonder whether we could accept in principle those amendments subject to officer and legal guidelines agreeing those amendments, because what I'm concerned about is that we approve those amendments and then find out that actually, one, they're not legal, and two, they're not possible. So I think we need the experience and expertise of our legal officers and our planning officers to be able to back up those amendments.
They can send them back.
And they
Let
can
the
send them
mover
back
and
to us.
seconder.
I'm just going to pass that over to Chris, please.
So thank you, Councillor Swear. So just to be clear, in terms of my list, in terms of the amendments that picking up from the discussion, there is a change in terms of an introduction of a 40-year time limit for the permission, and we can work on the detailed wording of that. An amendment to condition 30 to deal with in more detail the decommissioning point, as has been discussed, including, as Councillor Holland was referencing, in terms of removal of the piles and so forth, so we can reference all of the detail in relation to that. Similarly, either as an add-on to that condition or as an additional, the issue about restoring the soil and the grounds to the former agricultural use. So whether or not that's within condition 30 or an additional condition, but we can cover that off. There's the amendment as proposed within Catherine's presentation to condition 10B, which is dealing with that point around the planting, with the linked informative. And then Councillor Parker has suggested an amendment to condition 25, which is the construction management plan. And as I said, we would just need to go away and think about if that's requiring an addendum to the statement in terms of the wording, or whether or not it's effectively a new plan. So just to be clear, I'm very comfortable from the planning officer side that we can, all of these are matters that can be added as new conditions. Amendments can be made to existing conditions. We can work on the drafting. The standard process will be, once that's been done, we will send to the mover and the seconder, along with the chair and the vice chair of the committee, to agree. If there are any fundamental problems, so picking up on your last point, we'd have to report the matter back to planning committee, but I do not foresee that would be the case on the basis of the conditions and the discussion that's happened. So I'm clear, providing we're talking about that list, I'm clear on what we would need to go away and action. Hopefully that's helpful, Madam Chairman.
Madam Chairman, on the basis that Chris has just explained, and with the list, I'm happy to accept those amendments to my motion.
Councillor, and I take it you are happy to second that?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm very happy to second that proposition.
So just judging by the fact you put your hand up. So we have, so this application has been moved by Councillor Schwer, seconded by Councillor Holland, that we grant this application. All those in favour? Members, that application has been granted. Right, I'll allow any members members of public who only here for the first application, presuming you have no interest in staying for the second one, so I'll wait to you, I'll let you leave before we move on. Members, I'll just wait for Councillor Prime to return. I think we'll proceed now, and hopefully Councillor Prime will join us very shortly. So the next application on the agenda is another solar farm application. This is application number 5B, application number 23/02705, full land south of Sturmer Hall, Church Walk, Sturmer. Members, this application is on 117 of your agenda, to pages 221. We do have a speaker this evening, if I can find a relevant bit of paper. Yes, Ms Hannah Salmon, who is here on behalf of the applicant, again, 3 minutes, and if you'd like to press the button on the microphone till the red light comes on. Is it okay to proceed without Councillor Prime? Yeah, if you'd like to continue, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Hannah Salmon and I am Director of Planning for the applicant. Climate change and ever-reducing biodiversity affect us all. Our application gives councillors the opportunity to renew their vow to residents to address the climate emergency. This project will produce electricity for over 8,000 homes a year and reduce carbon emissions equivalent to taking 2,500 petrol cars off the road for 40 years. The development will also create 27 hectares of species-rich pasture, new woodland and shelter belt planting. This will lead to a 203% biodiversity net gain for habitats. This location was selected for its ability to connect viably into the grid via an overhead line to the immediate north of the site and following an extensive site search process. Our search for alternative sites found that there are no suitable sites of lower agricultural land value within 2 kilometres of our point of connection. The site is a logical one for solar. It's over 25 kilometres from the protected landscape of the AONB. The site benefits from mature woodland to the north and is set within a depression in the landscape, meaning that it is effectively screened from the nearest village of Sturmer. The rigorous technical assessments undertaken as part of the application show that the development will have no unacceptable impacts on the environment or local amenity. The Council's appointed technical advisor raised no objection in respect of landscape impact. The assessments demonstrate the proposed development is in accordance with Braintree's local plan policies. This is the conclusion of your planning officer. We originally met with Steeple Bumstead and Sturmish Parish Councils in late 2022 to explain our proposals and our desire to provide a community fund to improve green infrastructure locally. We also undertook a web-based consultation, followed by an in-person event at Sturmer Village Hall. Whilst the offer of a community fund has not been taken up by the parishes, it remains on the table, albeit outside and without prejudice to this application. Times are tough for farmers up and down the country. This proposal helps the farmer to secure the long-term future of his farm, not only by obtaining an additional revenue stream, but through delivering a complementary alternative agricultural use by rewilding and grazing the land between the panels. As referenced in the letter submitted to members by the landowner, this field produced 5 tonnes per hectare of beans a few years ago, but this year yielded just 3.5. Solar here will allow the soil to regenerate and to yield much more once the panels are gone. The proposed development does not result in a permanent loss of agricultural land, but preserves it for future generations. Our proposal is put forward for a 40-year period, and we have proffered a condition to your planning officer to restrict this and allow for the decommissioning of the site following this period. We work within an increasingly challenging environment, trying to find suitable low-impact sites to deliver low-cost renewable energy, which can help reduce our reliance on imports from abroad and help combat ever-rising energy prices. This is a suitable, viable, renewable energy proposal which has been found by your officers to be in accordance with your local plan. I hope the committee feel able to follow your officers' recommendation and support it this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll now move on to, it's the only speaker we have this evening, so we'll move on now to the presentation for Catherine's report. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. So as mentioned, we are in the vicinity of Sturmer, land south of Sturmer Hall. Proposal is for a solar farm, but also in this case including energy storage facility and obviously all the associated infrastructure. So the site's obviously marked in the red line here. It's 32 hectares of land. You can see in the north here that these are the proposed accesses to the site, and they would adjoin this existing unmade track which runs from the main road here, Hill Lane here. And you note also on the plan Beck's Grove, which is a local wildlife site. And it's also worth noting, I think, this area of woodland here is it's quite distinctive in the copse of trees. So when I show you the photographs, that'll sort of give you a reference, really. In terms of the locality, Sturmer's to the north, and the Store River Valley is to the south. The site is not in the AONB, it is in the project area, however. Sorry, a little bit keen on the fingers there. So the aerial photograph here, again, that's the track showing you that existing belt of woodland, Bexgrove and the copse. There's a hedgerow runs along here, and some partial hedgerows sort of here. But again, in the photographs, you'll probably note this hedgerow. I'll show you that on Hill Lane. So in terms of constraints, the site, it doesn't adjoin any public rights of way, but you will note that there are some to the north here, a particular footpath which runs from the vicinity of this is building Yew Tree Farm up past the site, which is sort of over here really. You'll see that in this orange line, that's the protected lane designation. So that speaks to policy LBP 69 of the local plan. In terms of contours, the site is much more steeply sloping, I would say, than the previous site that you've just been discussing. It is fairly well contained, though, in terms of the wider landscape. I'll come on to that in a minute, but I'll show you the topography. In terms of listed buildings, this is Upper House Farm here, and Walton's Farm. They're listed, and this isn't listed. This is Abbott's Grove Cottages. So the land grading is grade 2 predominantly, as sampled by the applicant, with a small portion of grade 3A land. So it's 100% best and most versatile land. In terms of topography, this is what I was alluding to really, I think, is that you'll see that this, because it is as the agent mentioned, it's essentially a small depression in the landscape. So when I show you the pictures, you'll appreciate that really it's only the proximity of the site and the surrounding roads that it can be seen. There aren't any really significant long distance views as identified in the landscape character assessment. Again, it's a plateau area, so it is a higher area of land, sort of sloping down to the river valley in the south. So in terms of the site plan, this is actually a slightly revised site plan from that which was noted in your committee reports. The only difference has been a little bit more detail in the middle here in terms of exactly, some of these components, exactly where they would sit in the compound. So this is the copse of trees, which you saw in the aerial photographs. This is the woodlands, which I pointed out initially. And to the west of that would sit this battery storage compound. That would obviously be hooked into, there is a power line which essentially runs all the way along here. You'll see in the photographs. Note the public rights of way, and this is proposed landscaping. We'll move on to the landscaping plan in a moment. But in this area of battery storage, there's the power conversion system, BESS transformer, combiner box, and the containers, with other containers also situated in this area. So the customer substation, storage container, etc. These little black marks are the MV power stations, which are proposed, and this is the proposed construction compound here. So this is the proposed landscaping, which shows you a new belt really of landscaping all along the boundaries of the site. So there wouldn't, I think perhaps the committee report mentioned that there might be tree loss. There is, just to say, there are no loss of trees or hedgerows proposed at all. we have the tree plans, we have all the details, and nothing is proposed to be lost. So this is essentially the additional landscaping, particularly up here and along the edges. So the solar panels would be 3.1 metres high at their maximum. Obviously it's sloping ground, so yeah, it may be less than that in places. That's the customer substation for you. It's just a container essentially. Storage container. Control and monitoring container in that area which I pointed out. The DC combiner boxes in that compound for battery storage. These are the units of battery storage really would be in these containers, of which I think there are 4 are proposed. Power conversion system again in that area. And again these BESS transformers are also in that area. I think that area was to be, and that's the MB power stations which I mentioned. The battery storage area would, as a revision, was enclosed with fencing in order to address some of the fire service comments, so we don't have full details of that at the moment. So we've added a bit to the condition. You'll see in my recommendation that I've added bits of condition just requiring further details of that if that proves to be necessary. Other fencing around the site would be obviously this standard deer fencing really. So, and you can see there's also cameras proposed. So the cameras are 2.5 metres. Oh, the deer fencing is 2.5 metres high and the cameras are 3 metres high. So this is, you're standing here really at the bottom of Hill Lane. This is Walton's farmhouse, I believe. Oh no, sorry, this is Abbott's Grove Cottages. And this is the boundary, the very bottom boundary of the site. As you continue up that lane, you can see there's hedgerows on both sides. Again, this is the southern edge of the site. Then it becomes more open, that hedgerow isn't there, and you can see here that this is the area of woodland. Again, that's the area of woodland that I pointed out that's closest to the road. This is the copse of trees, this is Bexgrove, this is Hill Road. So, you know, obviously screening is needed around the site and it is needed around all boundaries. So we're now at the top of Hill Lane, right opposite Abbott's Grove Cottages. This is the track, so this would be the operational access to the site. It wouldn't be used for construction activity. And these are the power lines which I referred to, which run at sort of almost parallel to that unmade track, which I'm sort of just marking out here. And over in the distance there, you've got a sort of conurbation of Haverhill, really. Sturmer somewhere, I think, in this valley. This is the site access would be now behind you. So you see the track sort of just passing down there. This is the area of woodland. This is Bexgrove, so you get some infill planting here. And all the development would be behind this area of woodland. Again, this is the site access. That's the area of woodland, so you can see sort of from the other direction really. So now the site is to your left-hand side. This is Bexgrove. You can see this unmade track as it sort of continues across this expanse of farmland over to the main road, which is on the horizon really. We'll come to that. So this is Bexgrove, this is the site itself. You're now looking sort of south really, so you can see the Store Valley. Site itself again, Store Valley. these are mock-ups, I suppose, or in terms of the view from the footpath, which passes to the west of the site. It's a little distance away. This is Beck's Grove, and you can see that, you know, without any screening, the site would be visible. However, you know, as noted, we do have screening proposed around all the boundaries of the site. This is the farm track as it's continuing westwards, really, to meet up with the main road. And this is the main road. You're now sort of on the main road, effectively looking back towards the site. This would be the construction route in, and this is the area of woodland. This is Beck's Grove, so the site's sort of down in that dip. This is the construction access on that main road, that farm track. So you can see that there's a very sort of newly established hedgerow really along that boundary. That would just need to be pruned, maintained in order to maintain the visibility display. And this is a view sort of towards the site from the main road to the west, where you've got again, this is sort of the site here in this area. So again, the considerations are quite detailed and very similar to the previous proposal, really, in terms of you know, what the considerations actually are. Although, you know, obviously there are differences in terms of how much of the site is best and most versatile land, what the energy generation benefits may or may not be, except in all those other aspects, what the harms may be. The report poses a similar argument for your consideration, which is that we do actually have a sequential assessment which considers alternative brownfield sites and lower quality agricultural land. So that is a tick, I suppose. However, whether we have compelling justification that for it to be sited on higher quality agricultural land is for the decision maker to decide. If you were to come to a conclusion that that particular part of the policy wasn't satisfied, you'd then have to consider obviously whether the whole policy was satisfied or not. It's not a policy which says that all criteria have to be satisfied, so I think you've got to look at it in the round. Officer's view is that, yeah, that initial balance at the beginning is satisfied, all other aspects are satisfied, therefore the policy is satisfied, which leads you to a point of no conflict with the development plan, which leads you to considering other material considerations again, and all that is obviously weighed up in the report for you. And ultimately the planning balance really, again, in officer's opinion, essentially comes down to when best and most versatile, the fact that Braintree has a proliferation of this land, and the fact that we are obligated to support solar development and to meet climate change objectives, unless obviously the impacts are such that they can't be mitigated and are fundamentally unacceptable. Therefore leaves you to a position of, yeah, it's quite difficult obviously to say that the harm is such that it outweighs the significant benefit of renewable energy generation. So the recommendation is again for approval in this case. There's just a few changes which I've made. They're really just typographical, sort of just to take account of that there was an error, for example, in condition 11, just in the plan number, for example. So it's just just tying up some of the descriptions, really. So I mean, I don't think it's all just fine detail, really. None of that's particularly material to your consideration. But I think probably you need to decide whether you wanted to apply the similar changes to conditions and add on that 40-year time limit and potentially sort of beef up any conditions around reinstatement if you were indeed minded to go with the recommendation. Yeah, that's everything for me.
Chris.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and apologies. Just to try to assist members on that point and not preempting the debate, but just in terms of consistency with the previous decision, in addition to the amendments that are proposed on that slide there, in terms of soil management, we've got condition 7, that there's the possibility to bolster that, and there's condition 27, which deals with the decommissioning. So those would be the two relevant ones, and then there's the point around a time-limited proposal as well. So hopefully that's helpful just in terms of the other relevant conditions in terms of the consistency with the previous decision. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Catherine. Councillor Spray.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Catherine, for another good presentation. I could almost sort of repeat at this point what I said about the first application, and I won't, except that other than I know there were local objections, we have no objections here from statutory consultees. But I just wanted to touch on something slightly different, which we didn't really talk about with the first application. We've discussed an awful lot of other things, and that is around how difficult really life is for farmers now. I think the speaker, Ms Salmon, put it very clearly. She talked about the benefits of this application, but also that life is quite tough for farmers, and I think we've all had the letter by email and also hard copy. I certainly had a hard copy of a letter from one of a member of the family, Christopher Haylock. I don't know if Mr Haylock is in the audience this evening, but pointing out that his family have farmed this land for 5 generations, and in order to really make it work now, he has to diversify. And diversification farmers can take all sorts of different ways now. It can be a B&B, open a farm shop, holiday lets, whatever. This is a solar farm, and it is just another form of diversification in order to make, I think, the feeling, strong feeling I'm getting, in order to make this viable for him and his family. And I think it's just, it is a fair point to be made, alongside all the reasons about providing green energy, and alongside the planning reasons. So I really just wanted to make that that additional point. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with the point just made by Councillor Schweer, and also, sorry.
Councillor Spray.
No, Councillor Spray and Councillor Schweer both made a similar point. Okay. And that is to do with how we manage to make our farms sustainable in the long term economically. And of course, one of the important things about this, unlike a farm shop or all sorts of other things which can be rather ephemeral, in my experience, we're talking about a long-term revenue stream here. Very, very important thing in making our farms viable. So I agree with that. I think it's a powerful thought and something we should be aware of. I'd also say that I think the topography of the area is an important issue. This is something that I've looked at on a number of occasions with various applications. The topography tends to actually hide this site to some extent, and so it's highly beneficial if people are not actually looking into the thing in a big way. So setting out on a plateau, which is not the case here, on high ground is one, but the way the land lies here, I think, is another demonstration that we can settle these in the countryside, in places where the natural topography helps with the screening. But the screening is really my main concern with this. And this is just a reiteration of what was said in the previous application, that I think it's extremely important that the screening, especially with an exposed site like this, goes in as early as is possible, because it takes time to establish. It needs to go in at the right time of year. So I'm not proposing it has to be done before anything else, but it certainly should be conditioned, in my view, to go in very early in the construction process in order to actually deliver the screening of the site effectively as soon as possible. And so I would hope that we can do that on this occasion. Thank you.
Could I just ask you to comment on that request for a condition for early screening? I think, Councillor Holland, you're really talking about, are you talking about all the planting or just the perimeter planting or all of it?
All of the planting should be, I think all of the planting should be established as early as is possible in order to be effective as soon as is possible. But it is certainly the perimeter planting which is going to be most important to the screening of the site. The photographs we've been shown this evening clearly show how visually exposed it is. And I think it's important that we actually deal with the concerns of the community over the amenity of the site. And it can be done effectively. It's not a big ask. Thank you.
So the condition which you have before you in this particular item, it is exactly the same as the amended one from the previous item. What we could do as well is add the informative that we had on the previous, same as the previous item, really, so it's all the same arguments, the same belt and braces approach, and sort of similar control, really.
Thank you, that's comfortable.
Could I just, in relation to that, I think this site is extremely exposed. I know actually this site very well as well, because I used to ride around there, funnily enough, a lot. It is very, very, very exposed, and I think just from my experience at Bentley, it is really important that screening goes in. I personally would like it to go in before construction starts. Can we specifically condition that rather than just put it in as to be discussed with officers, and officers will try to persuade the applicant to put it in early? I mean, I just think it's so important on this site.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So, again, just taking you back to the suggested wording within condition 11, and it's 11B. So that deals with effectively a programme detailing the timing of the landscaping works in relation to the phasing of construction, together with irrigation and monitoring and so forth. So that's essentially requiring us to get details from the applicant as to when everything will go in. The linked informative can make it clear in terms of the expectation that it goes in early. I think we're in a similar situation in terms of requiring it as a pre-commencement. Obviously, things like the compound and so forth and the access to the site probably needs to be established first before you could do planting of that sort of scale before anything else happens. I think that's possibly going to be the difficulty. It's obviously members' decision on that. Again, I'd just probably throw caution that obviously if it was put as a pre-commencement condition, that there is the risk obviously for an appeal on that front as well. But I think the wording of the condition with the informative, my advice would be that gives sufficient comfort that we can push the applicant on that front to get it in as early as possible across as much of the sites as possible. And if that's not the case, they would need to justify why that's not the case.
Before I just pass on to you, Councillor, would you mind if I just ask a related question to that? I wasn't quite clear. Was there proposed to be any planting along the roads or not? It doesn't show it on the plan, I suspect. Is that right?
You are correct. There isn't any planting along the roadside.
That's Robert.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, similar but slightly different application in some respects. Yeah, I read the letter from the farmer. It's very interesting. Yeah, the point about climate change is an important one. You wouldn't think it in the UK, but globally we've just gone through the hottest summer recorded, and globally we're warming at about 2 centigrade, maybe 2.5 per century. Over land it's faster than that. And if you extrapolate that not that many decades into the future, that's going to make farming in the UK completely different to what it is now. because you're going to have much higher temperatures and much higher evaporation rates. So, you know, it's a point well made about how farming is changing with climate change. But you could also see, and this isn't a comment about this particular farmer, because there's a lot of land round Essex like that, just why we have a biodiversity crisis. I mean, those huge fields with so few hedges and trees. So the planting they're proposing is really good, but I agree with Councillor Holland. That's going to have to go in and be successful as early as possible, because that is going to be very, very visible if that doesn't happen. And again, I'd ask officers just to confirm, please. I'm assuming on a site like this it would be 100% native planting. I think without going over, well, at this hour, I know members and the residents do not want to go over the same ground again, but I will just draw out the point. This is a 100% BMV site, 93% grade 2. So that's top of the pile in terms of the applications we've got before us and the appeal. I didn't read every dot and comma of those appeal decisions, but I speed read them, and they weren't as high as this. So the same argument applies, that are we really actually taking any notice of BMV? Because, you know, if we had a 100% grade 1 site, would we be saying exactly the same thing? So I come back to the same point. I think there needs to be more national guidance about this. All these competing interests of land, are we actually protecting our farmland at all? I would, though, just one point, draw the officer up on something she said, which I'd like her to clarify. My reading of her report at paragraph 11.25 was that the sequential test was, quotes, poor, and that the compelling justification test had, quotes, not been met, which I think is a bit stronger than what she said. In that instance, are we just saying the same as we said for the last one, that the balance is the same, or is this, or is the officer saying actually in this one the balance is finer between the benefits and the disbenefits? Just a couple of other points. Skylarks again re-provided within the same ownership. That's a good thing. Yeah, I think that's all. Just those 2 points, please. Is the planting native, and that point about balance? Thank you.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's actually pretty confusing, because there is the policy itself. The first part of LPP 73 refers to it's an internal balance in that policy where you weigh the loss of the best and most versatile against the energy generating potential of the land. And I think on that basis we'd say, well, actually there's not a loss of best and most versatile agricultural land, because if we put the conditions in place, etc., then, you know, it should be able to resume as best and most versatile agricultural land. There isn't any reference in that part of the policy to the loss of land for food production and the impact of that. So obviously that is another consideration which is material, but isn't sort of specifically noted in this balance here. And then you pass on to obviously the lower part of the policy, which requires the compelling justification to be provided for proposals on the higher quality agricultural land. So the sequential test shouldn't just consider best and most versatile versus land which isn't best and most versatile. It should be sequentially assessed, sifting 3B, 3A, 2, 1, etc., and making arguments as to why, you know, that in theory that the lowest should be sifted more favourably to the higher land. We're not getting that sort of level of detail in our sequential assessments. It's satisfying the fact that it's been submitted, so it says it needs to be considered. That's a tick. But the actual sequential assessment doesn't perform, you know, that level of detail, and there's all types of reasons for that. One of the first reasons is if you just go off the agricultural land classification mapping, that doesn't give you any distinction between 3A or 3B, so you've got a problem there already. So how do you home in on this sort of, but this less the land of the lower grading, really, I suppose? then you sample the site and you find, in the previous case, that it's a mosaic of agricultural land classifications. It's not just, you know, it will have, you do it at sort of small intervals, and then they're all different gradings. So, you know, then you've got a problem with a site, you know, where do you point to next after that? And on the previous site, it was grade 2, but it actually came out as grade 3A predominantly. So the agricultural land classification isn't particularly anything to be guided by necessarily. So you have all these finer details, then you're asking what scale are you asking the applicant to do it, what sort of distance you're asking them to do it at. Overall, you don't have another area to point to in terms of, well, why don't you go there? Because a lot of that's the lower lands in the river valleys, it's completely unsuitable in landscape terms. And we don't have a additional SPD which identifies land for solar development, so it's more difficult to turn down speculative proposals. And obviously we have proliferation of this land. You have housing sites which are, you know, we're making arguments on housing sites, that is permanent loss of BMV, that the harm is limited. So I think you've got to come to the opinion that for a solar farm the harm is limited. If you're coming to the conclusion that for a housing site the harm is limited, and you know, when it's weighed in the balance against the fact that there's a proliferation of the land. So yeah, at the end of the day, obviously it makes it, the policy is quite difficult to satisfy, essentially.
Councillor Abbott.
Thank you. Just to be clear, are you saying that the compelling justification test has not been met because their sequential test was so poor? Or are you in part or even wholly saying that it's because this is a site of such high BMV? I mean, this is one of the highest BMV sites we've had for anything, solar or housing. So is it that was it that the poor sequential test led you to that conclusion that the justification hadn't been met? Because you actually did say that in the report, didn't you? It's not been met.
Yes, I agree. And the same conclusion was reached in the previous site, which was considered, which is, yeah, that the detail neither proves or disproves and therefore isn't compelling. And I think, yeah, that then you have to look at the overall policy and whether that's satisfied in the main or not, because it's not a criteria, you know, it's not all criteria in that policy have to be satisfied. That's not the way it's worded.
Yeah, just I think the weight given to that's the most versatile land. I mean, it is important. This is why there was this motion passed by council that we think a lot about energy, but we also need to think about food. And I mean, I did come back to the point that I made on the first application, is that I don't understand why a solar farm developer would look at the agricultural land classification map and just not exclude anywhere that's grade 2. I mean, I know it doesn't distinguish between grade 3A and 3B, was fine, but it does distinguish between grade 2, and they have chosen to look at a site that is grade 2 rather than going for areas that are on that map as grade 3. And so I do have I struggle slightly with the application of that test, and it is, you know, BMV is an important. With housing, I think it's different because there are other considerations about why you would want to build on the edge of a settlement. Obviously, I don't think those considerations necessarily apply. But anyway, Councillor Hooks.
Can we bolster condition 27, unsurprisingly for me, but because for the 40 years, because it's not really mentioned in the officer's report that it's a 40-year application, but it was obviously mentioned in question time earlier on, and I think by the farmers' letter earlier on in the week as well. So can we just bolster that, please?
So just to be clear, like the previous one, it would be a new condition that would be adding in terms of putting on a temporary time limit, but that's obviously within members' gift.
Anybody else want to say anything on this application? Or does anybody, if they don't, would anybody like to move this recommendation? Oh, sorry, first of all, Chris would like to come back.
Apologies, Madam Chairman. Just to be clear, as mentioned, just before anybody moves a motion, it'd just be good to get some clarity in terms of, so Councillor Hooks has mentioned the time limit condition, as I mentioned. I don't know whether or not members feel strongly, but condition 27 around the decommissioning and condition 7 deals with the soil management plan. It would be useful to get clarity as to, you know, if members were to, if members wanted those conditions amended.
Councillor Schwer, are you putting your hand up or not?
I am, Madam Chairman.
Go ahead then, Councillor Schwer.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman, and this, I think, is a compellingly different to the previous application because of just the sheer size. The previous application was 53 hectares, this is 32, which is considerably less. I think the actual situation and siting of the potential solar farm is good, and as the officers have explained through tonight's presentation, that it is part of a larger part of a agricultural holding, and this is also considered a diversification. I do agree with the points made by colleagues earlier with regards to the landscaping. I think that is really, really important. Obviously, not only from the point of view of screening, but also from the point of view of biodiversity net gain, but also to benefit flora and fauna, because as we saw, it is a fairly large section of land, so there will be huge benefits on that. And of course, should this application be successful tonight, there is that advantage too, that actually resting that land for 40 years in itself is regenerative and has enormous benefits in the longer term too, apart from just the energy offered as well. And I think this has been well talked over so far, but I would support officers' recommendation, and I move them subject to the same amendments as mentioned just a moment ago by Chris about the 40-year time limit, the soil management condition 7, and the decommissioning as in condition 27.
Is that fine? Second up. Councillor Spray? Yes. So it's been moved by Councillor Schwer again, seconded by Councillor Spray, that we grant this application. All those in favour? Application has been granted. Okay, members, that brings us to the end of this meeting. Thank you very much for attendance.